Hey, welcome back, everybody. So let's do the intro of Petra and myself, although most of you know me from the groups and from the various things that I've done. Let me just take away this ribbon. Okay, so there's Petra's bio. I don't like to read out people's bios. I find it a little bit silly. So let me ask you to introduce yourself and talk about your work a little bit, please, Petra.
Okay, yeah. So you know my name. Some of you know me, at least one or two. I know Peter from another context. So I work as a somatic therapist and also as a movement medicine teacher and as a group facilitator. And yeah, I weave together many different strands of things that I've studied, things that I've learned, things that I've learned through life and things that are important to me. But I guess the main strand in all of this work is really the wisdom of the body and the intelligence of the nervous system, and using that to support all of us, both my clients and the people in group programs, to navigate life with a little bit more ease, with a bit better understanding of who we are, why we are, how we are, and to open up this choice or the sense of possibility that gets lost when we're stuck in some of these patterns that are wired into our nervous system. I do that through one-on-one work. I do that through group programs. As I said, I do that through movement. And sometimes it's a combination of various different modalities that comes together. So Peter knows me through a group program I ran that was very much around our relationship with the wider web of life, which included movement, which included some practices that weren't explicitly nervous system practices, but that definitely nourished the nervous system. So the way I think about it is that it's almost like an ecosystem with all these different plants, and at different times, some of them are different seasons, some of them are more in the foreground, more visible, and others are more like the mycelium under the soil. And one of my big interests in this, whether it's in the sort of personal one-on-one work or in the group work, is this question of how do we create change? How do we create change in the sense of personal healing, personal change, and how do we create change in the bigger picture in terms of, you know, what's happening in the world? Because as far as I know, all my life I've wanted to have a world that is more just, that is more equitable, that is more beautiful for all beings and not just for those who have been privileged to be in power or in charge. And throughout my life, I've kind of explored different takes on that question of what creates change, both through this work with the nervous system and the body, but also through other work that I did with communities in Africa and Asia around behavior change around sanitation. And I guess this nervous system piece has really been the thing that brings it all together for me. Like after thinking when I was a little girl, thinking that knowledge is the thing that changes things, and later on coming to the body and learning more about embodiment and somatics and feeling that's a big piece. I really feel now the nervous system is the thing that ties all of this together, that makes change possible, and in a way that's really yeah, also part of our topic here today. I mean, we are going to talk about the Enneagram and triggers and so on, but in the sense of the polyvagal theory, it really is a beautiful door that opens up the possibility of change once we understand how our nervous system works, once we understand how our particular nervous system is wired, because there's no one size fits all. There's no all nervous systems are not equal. We all have our history that shaped our nervous system, and the history of our ancestors, and the history of our culture, and the history of the place where we have lived. So once we can understand what our particular nervous system is like, and once we have some tools, then we have some possibility over time to create change for ourselves. And in my belief, that also ripples out because, as I said earlier, we are constantly in co-regulation with everything and everyone around us. And when we are more in a regulated state and a ventral state, then we also have access to more choice in terms of how we want to act, how we want to relate, how we want to relate to ourselves, others, and the wider web of life. Yeah, I think that's enough from me, I think. But if you have any questions, you're very welcome to ask. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Ingrid.
Thanks so much. There's so much you said that's really resonant and has so many ideas associated with it that link. There's a consilience and a coherence to what you're saying that's confirmed and validated by many different paradigms, and I think is so relevant to our Enneagram work, because we are talking about getting out of the stuck habits of our personality, which are actually part of an embodied nervous system state. Our reactivity is in the body. And if you look at all the trauma literature, they're speaking about an embodiment revolution as a kind of sea change in the zeitgeist of, therapy. And there are so many new modalities emerging that are working in the present moment, in the here and now, in our adult ego state, that have departed quite radically from talk therapy, where we do, what Bessel van der Kolk speaks about as an archaeological dig, where we're sitting in a room revisiting the past and re-exploring and activating certain nervous system states associated with the past, rather than resourcing in the here and now to actually experience a change real time. So in my model and my way of working with the Enneagram, it's really about that. It's about how do we facilitate state change with the client so they have an experience of something other than their type fixation, their type compulsion, their stuckness, their habitual loops of thought. And how do we interrupt that stuck pattern in order to, I think of it almost as give the client a little bit of a holiday from their personality. And that's the theme of a session we're running on Saturday about psychedelics. Claudio Naranjo was a pioneer in the field of psychedelics. And that was what he said they did. He said that they interrupt the normal mindset, ways of thinking, ways of inhabiting oneself. They reveal our normal pattern to ourselves and allow us to see, oh, it doesn't have to be that way. And not only doesn't it have to be that way, but we're kind of doing it to ourselves. As Tom Condon says, it sounds a bit shaming, but it's an active response. It's an active deployment of a strategy. And it's quite fixed. It's like a one-size-fits-all way of dealing with the world. So that's kind of how I understand Enneagram type, is that it's a stuck pattern, it's embodied, and we're deploying it in anticipation of the world being a certain way. And where did we get the idea of how the world is? We got it in very early childhood. So what our type essentially is a defense against the past. And when we let that sink in, it's actually quite mind-blowing, because our type is a kind of fully embodied prediction error. Our type is anticipating something that is not actually real in the present moment. It's almost, we have a child state in our body that is anticipating the trauma that we experienced in childhood, whether it was big T or little t trauma, whether it was misattunement or rejection or invalidation, humiliation, threat, whatever it is. Those type triggers are things that we're sensitive to from our childhood, and we are walking around in anticipation of the negative consequences that came along with those events. So really stop for a moment and allow that piece of information to be assimilated your type is a defense against the past. And this is confirmed by neuroscience. There's a woman named Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's currently the most cited neuroscientist. And her work is quite astonishing because she says the same thing. She says our brain is in a black box. It has absolutely no clue what's going on. And its purpose is to make predictions on the basis of sensory information that's coming in through all of our senses. And I'm talking also about our other intelligences, our internal, our gut, our all the sensory information, the micro cues we're picking up, people's, pupil dilation, things that we're unconscious of. But on the basis of all the information that's going in, our brain is predicting what's about to happen next. And it's telling us what the best thing to do is in that situation as a survival system. And so, really allowing oneself to reckon with that piece of information is we realize we're not really here. We're actually not really in the here and now. We're living in a kind of waking trance where we are very selectively attending to things on the basis of whether or not we think they are threatening in the way that things were threatening in our early childhood. And I'm talking pre-verbally as well. So I've jumped straight into my piece and into the triggers. So just to give you a quick review of where we're going with this, I'm going to be talking about the Enneagram and the triggers. Petra's going to lead us through the Polyvagal Theory, which is about the nervous system state. And for me, the thing that got me absolutely intrigued by this work is this thing of state changes story and story follows state. Most of us are very, very busy in our story, in our mind, our construal of reality, what we focus on. That's very much the Enneagram fixation. And we don't know how to dismantle it. And we also don't really usually know that it's arriving and arising out of our nervous system state. And that when we're able to resource ourselves, the story changes. So Petra's also going to do a therapeutic demo exercise, and then we'll have some closing integration and reflections. There were just a couple of other things you said, Petra, that were so key to me. These new ways of being, that we develop an ecology of practices. That's what they call it in cognitive science, that we aren't just thinking and analyzing ourselves and applying insights to ourselves, as valuable as insights are, that we've got other things, bottom-up practices, whether it's yoga or dance or drumming. Rhythmical interaction with people has been proven to be incredibly healing. Tapping, EFT. There are a vast range of modalities available now that are not about talking, and they're therapeutically proven, they're evidence-based. Things like Tai Chi. So to have an ecology of practice that supports your nervous system, it was something that came to mind when you spoke about this ecosystem. And Dan Siegel's work around integration, that a lot of our healing comes from integration. I think we'll probably loop back to that. But what I want to do, just coming back to this point of the Enneagram as a prediction error. So we've got these various forms of wounding. And I'm talking about deficits in the holding environment, whether it's in our holding from a self-preserving perspective, our sense of physical survival, being fed, being held, being safe and comfortable, there being someone there to look after us, feeling a sense of belonging and connection, and having our presence validated, having our aliveness, our life force, our spontaneity, and our creativity encouraged. So the instincts are all part of our very, very pre-verbal experience. And then we've got our three-centered intelligence. And this is why I like working with tri-type, is because it reminds us that we've all got a sense of agency, aliveness in our body. We've all got power. We all here with the ability to exercise agency. And that means at the most basic level, I can choose right now to pick up my water bottle, that we've got this will and aliveness, and that gets inhibited in childhood in various ways. And there are consequences for that inhibition, for shaming our spontaneity or being invalidated or being controlled or being in an environment where it's dangerous to assert our aliveness. So that's one of the forms of agency, one of the forms of intelligence that gets compromised. And I've never forgotten one of Julia's metaphors. She spoke about we have to trade in or amputate certain parts of ourselves if they aren't welcome in childhood. And I often quote you on this, Julia. But if we aren't allowed to express our agency and will, and we have to be invisible, then we're going to have some primary wounding in our relationship with the life force. We're going to feel disconnected from the life force. And the types that are most disconnected from their life force and aliveness are the 9, the 4, and the 5, the withdrawn types, is they've almost foreclosed on their power and agency in the world. So that's the part that needs to be recovered and healed. And then in the heart center or the image center, there's that sense of misattunement, like a fundamental misattunement in childhood of you are worthwhile, valuable, special, unique, and lovable just because of who you are. And I am here with you. So there's a validation of the child's emotional life, and their feelings are welcome. They aren't shamed for self-expression of their needs and feelings. So that's where wounding comes from in the image center, is I don't have to put my feelings into exile. I don't have to exile the natural love and connection and the natural need for love, connection, and belonging. So that's where the shame and the grief comes from in the heart center, is the sense that I'm not really loved for who I am, and I have to adopt an image in order to be acceptable and in order to belong. And then in the mental center, it's about what can I trust? How can I orient myself in the world for some sense of predictability and safety, and that things make sense at some level, that I'm not alone figuring it out. For 6s at the center of the head center, we're talking about a sense of guidance and authority that gradually leads to a sense of inner guidance. And this is something that the head center types are missing. And they're trying to find it in kind of ineffective ways. So this is how I understand the pre-verbal and the early childhood wounding from an Enneagram perspective. And what this gives rise to is these differential maps of reality. So I'm anticipating certain things, I'm predicting certain things. As a result, I've got what's called a salience landscape that only includes some things and excludes other things altogether. So things are completely off my map. Whereas for other people, those are absolutely their preoccupation. And when working with teams, it's really, really helpful to introduce the Enneagram in this way, to say, we've got certain deficits that lead us to focus on some things and totally miss out on an awareness of other things. And that in a team, it's very helpful to bring these different maps together. so that we can have a more comprehensive picture. I mean, these maps are all literally of the same place. I found a place and found every different map I could find of that place to illustrate the different types. You know, like here's the Enneagram 3. They want to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And their nervous system is wired for that kind of, let me get there fast. There's an efficiency, there's a kind of hype. Whereas sevens, this is 7, kind of a bit in outer space, slightly dissociated from reality, because that's where all the pain and restriction and limitation is. So I'd rather look at the ultra big picture, where I don't have to get involved in, you know, the details that other types are busy with. And so, Petra, maybe you can bring this into the discussion of what nervous system states are associated with these kinds of preoccupations. Obviously, it'll be different for different people. And then I wanted to put this up because I think people really like reflecting on their own type triggers. So I want to give you an opportunity to just look at what I've put out here, and I hope that you can see it. Let me just enlarge it a little bit for you to be able to reflect on these type triggers and what it feels like for you. If there's one here that you particularly relate to, and you're welcome to take a screenshot, and I will share these slides so you can get them and you can use this. You can use this with your clients. I often find it a very helpful exercise with the team to say, okay, have a look and find one word that is, yep, that's me, and then share it with the person next to you, and then we debrief, just to completely normalize that every single one of us has something that causes a change in our nervous system, causes an anticipation of this is not good. And even as you're reading these, you might notice a reaction in your nervous system. So I invite you to just make a note of any particular one that stood out for you from your type or from your instinct, dominant instinct, whatever stood out for you here. Maybe the bullet point or particular word. And notice when you are thinking about that, how your body responds. So I'm inviting you to do a bit of introception here. Daniel Siegel speaks about the criticality of a capability for introception. So that is turning your awareness to what's happening inside. So what happens in your gut when you read that? What happens in your heart, the cardiac intelligence? And what happens to the quality of your awareness? So what imagery comes to mind? And how does your mind feel? So you can even compare what's happening now as you read this to the state when Petra took us through that self-regulation exercise to bring us into ventral. So what's happening right now, I would guess, because it's certainly happening to me, is that my nervous system is being activated by considering this trigger. I see you nodding, Vanessa. Is that true for you as well?
Yes. I mean, I find myself as I'm reading some of these words almost having thoughts of, yes, that makes sense when that happened. And I'm starting to go into the story.
Yes. So it's almost like we have a little bit of a flashback to a situation, And you can imagine that if we were to talk a lot about that and go into the story and what happened and how you interpreted it, that in a coaching session, we could spend a long time in the story related to that. And my kind of praxis in coaching, and I know Petra working with the nervous system, is okay, so let's be with that feeling right now. And I would say, how does it feel to be sharing the story with me right now as we sit together? So we're reminding the client of their adult state. We're reminding them that they are here and now, that they're telling a story and they're in a relationship with me telling the story. So there's actually a process intervention happening. And we're not going off with the client into the story. We're actually inviting them back to here. What is it like? How does that feel? What happens if you breathe around that? And then we're resourcing the client to remember another state. So I'll often ask a client when they're really worrying about something. I saw someone today who was in a lot of anticipation about a big announcement meeting this afternoon. And so, she was talking about restructuring, whatever. And I said, so let's talk about a time when you met the unknown and you got through it in a way that you felt, well-resourced, grounded, the kinds of things that matched her type. I didn't make too many suggestions or preempt it, but talk about a time when you got through an encounter with the unknown and you felt really good about how you handled it. So switching out of the story into, and then she said, yes, there was a time. And she started speaking about that time and about how well she handled it and how good she felt. And as she was talking, her state starts changing. And her posture changes and her face changes. So it's almost like a form of conversational hypnosis. But the key point is out of the story, into the here and now, into the body, into relationship. So that's one of the things that I really love doing with this Enneagram work, is we're still working with the specificity of type. And we're using the Enneagram insights, but at a process level, we're staying out of content. So that's key if we're bringing in top down, bottom up, which is an integrative practice. Daniel Siegel speaks about the integration of consciousness, and that's what we basically are doing. We're doing a top down integration of the mind and the body. We're doing a left hemisphere and right hemisphere integration of coming into the present moment and not being stuck in left brain analysis of what happened or left brain analysis of ourselves. And we're integrating consciousness between states and within states. So it's a very different way of working. And that's why I love Petra's modality and work so much. And we work so well together with leadership groups in using the Enneagram insights, but landing them in a process way that's really effective. So here we've got the 3 levels, and this is where I'm going to hand over to Petra, is that when we triggered, we can't be wise. This is something that's becoming increasingly interesting to me from a cognitive science perspective. Francesco Varela speaks about wisdom as ethical coping. But when we triggered, our frontal cortex is kind of offline. And that's the part of our brain that's able to think ahead and consider the impact of our actions and take someone else's perspective and not go into a constricted state where we're basically acting out our childhood trauma and deploying a kind of pseudo-adult form of coping. I'm not going to go into that. But these are the levels. I've only chosen 3. I've chosen 1, 4, which is kind of us on an average day. And then
You might
level
have to change
6.
the slide, Ingrid. We are only seeing we were seeing still the types.
Okay, sorry, it didn't change. Let me just see what happened there. Okay, thanks, Petra. So yeah, this is the slide. It didn't change, but it changed when I clicked the arrow. But here are the levels of health, and I chose 3 that I do use with corporate clients. I don't show them the levels 7, 8, and 9 because that scares them, and I don't want them to have that information about each other. But I show them these, like on an average day when we triggered, we tend to be like this, completely normalize it. This is us. This is me most of the time. And on an average to good day, we're at level 4. And when we're really feeling resourced, when we're really, really feeling our nervous system in a state of well-being and ease, at the how we are matched. They call it optimal grip in cognitive science. When we feel that we've got an optimal grip on the here and now, then we're going to be in our level 1, 2, and 3 states where we're able to meet the moment and we're not projecting the past onto the moment. So the lower down we go in the levels, the more prediction error we're making, the more we're projecting a movie of the past onto the present and we're not really here. So I want to just make that connection, that integration is not really conceptual, and it's not about making ourselves behave well. I know Enneagram 1s love that. It's like, okay, I'm going to be like that. That's not going to work, guys. Sorry. It's about your state. It's about if I am feeling okay in my own skin, if I'm feeling like being here and now in my beingness, in my me-ness, where my experience is kind of welcome and I'm not fighting reality and I'm not fighting my own feelings, then I'm going to be able to meet the moment in a more objective way. So I'm not, say, as a 6, anticipating getting into trouble if I do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. No, I'm not going to be watching everyone's faces if I'm a 2 to see whether I'm liked. So we're going to be more here. So Petra's got a lot of knowledge and experience and practices that resource us. And we don't need to even know all of this stuff. I find it helpful to know what it feels like when I'm here, because then I can notice, oh, my mouth is dry. I've got kind of white light around my vision. I can't really see everything. I've got like a very narrow, piercing focus. My mind feels fragmented, and it's like my blood has been turned into the heat of a blowtorch, and I'm shaking, and my teeth get very long, and I get those razor things coming out of my fingers like Wolverine. That's what it feels like. Okay, that's not exactly here. When I go down the levels, it's noticing the state that kicks in is like, it's a different person that jumps onto the stage when in that activated state. So the Enneagram helps us to stop and say, okay, what's going on with me? And it gives us some maps to do introception with more accuracy. But the main point is to do the introception and to learn how to do it and to get to know your nervous system. So this is where I'm going to hand over to Petra. I don't know if you want to do a little reboot. I noticed you saying, don't worry about the left brain, and you even touched your left brain. And I thought, Okay, that's me.
I wasn't doing that consciously.
I know. It's like, look, Petra's
I think I had an
pointing
itch here.
my left brain. Okay, so let's just come back, and Petra's gonna help us land back in the here and now together. We are together in the space. And
Yeah.
take us along, Petra.
Yeah, so before we get too involved in that next slide, just take another moment again to see where you've landed, how comfortable you are in this moment. You might want to change your position. You might want to lean back in your chair. If you've, like me, when I'm looking at presentations, I go forward, forward, forward to really see what's happening. I just want to take a sit back and relax your body again consciously. You might want to orient to the space that you're in, to just take a look around. I mean, this is a space you know well, so it's not about not knowing what's there, but when we're doing that intentionally, we're really giving our nervous system a chance to see, oh, I'm safe. So looking, really turning the neck and the head and the eyes to the left and the right, slowly, much slower than we would normally do. To also take in what's above us, what's below. It can be important to turn around and see what's behind us. As you can probably imagine, that had some evolutionary advantage to be aware of what was behind us. And as you're orienting to the space, just see if you can find something in the space that you're in that your eyes like to rest on, something that brings you pleasure. It might bring you pleasure because it's a nice shape or a nice color. It might be an object that holds some good memories. Or it might just be something that's in this moment appealing to you. And then just let your eyes rest there for a moment and really notice what happens in your interoception and the sensations in your body, in your breath. As you connect with this object or this place in your room and you really take it in through all your senses. It's a little mini practice that we can also do at any time during the day. We orient, and we can orient towards pleasure, which, like the 5% more comfortable earlier, pleasure is also connected with safety, right? We can't experience pleasure if we're not feeling safe. So this might seem very small and very like, oh, okay, whatever. But I promise you, if you do this regularly, you will feel it makes a huge difference, this orienting. It's one of the foundational practices in all the nervous system work, because our nervous system is constantly scanning anyway for safety and for danger. And when we give it the chance to do it consciously, and we give it a chance to connect with something that's pleasing or comforting or meaningful, we're really helping ourselves to access the ventral state. So Ingrid, maybe you can put the slide on and I can talk a little bit to that. But I want you to bring with you whatever you were experiencing now. And if at any point you're feeling yourself zoning out or you're feeling yourself activated, you can orient again to this place in your room or to this object. So this object, this place becomes a resource that you can keep connecting to.
Thanks so much. And I just want to give people the opportunity again just to scan the difference. This is between state integration. Just notice you were there and then you were there and now you're here, that there's a flow and a continuity and our states do shift. One of the things that happens when we're triggered and we're in the trance of our type is that we forget that we have access to another state. My hypnotherapy teacher called it the access state principle. Like I arrive in the room totally dysregulated and he'd say, well, I could get you out of this in 10 seconds, but there were other things to do. But just notice this within and between state integration that's possible. And that really is part of the Enneagram work, is being able to move ourselves. So sorry for interrupting your flow there, Petra, but I want to join the dots a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just wanted to, this little illustration on the left there, I mean, it's very clunky and basic, but just to clarify, when we're talking about the nervous system here, and particularly when we're talking about polyvagal theory, obviously there's a lot of different parts to our nervous system. And I don't know, Ingrid, if you can make it a bit bigger. I don't know if the reading is maybe a little bit too, the words are a little bit small on there, but just to give you an idea, so our nervous system has these different aspects, these different branches to it. And we're very familiar with the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. So that's the part of our nervous system that's really the control center that processes the incoming sensory information and then gives instructions outward. That's where thought and perception and decisions happen. But what we are concerned with here is much more on the other side there, the autonomic nervous system. And as the name suggests, autonomic, it sort of operates by itself autonomously. It's not something that we do, that we think about. So it's our heartbeat, our breath, our digestion, and all those processes that keep us alive, that thankfully that we don't have to think about. And we're going to talk about that part of it. So we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system, which is involuntary. And we're going to talk about, and this is where polyvagal theory comes in, about those two branches underneath, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And if you studied the nervous system maybe 15 years, 20 years ago, I mean, I did this during my yoga teacher training a long time ago, there was just this, we have the sympathetic and we have the parasympathetic, and it was like a seesaw. We're either in one or we're in the other. We're either in rest and digest or we're in fight or flight. And what polyvagal theory has really brought to it is this differentiation of the parasympathetic, that it's not just one state, that there are these two states, that there is the ventral vagal, the state of connection and safety, social engagement, and then there is also the dorsal vagal, which is the place of shutdown. Thanks, Ingrid. Shutdown, collapse. And sympathetic, as most of us are aware of, is fight or flight. And we'll go a little bit more into what those things look like, those states look like, in a little while. But I just wanted you to see like what part of the nervous system are we actually talking about here, and how does this sit within the bigger human nervous system. And on the right there, you see a beautiful illustration of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve, as most of you probably know, vagus comes from the word for wanderer, like vagrant. So it really wanders throughout the body and innervates all these different places, from up here in the face and in the head area, into the lungs, into the heart, into all the organs, right down to, in women, to the cervix. Which is not on the illustration because that's usually not in the anatomy books for obvious reasons. But yeah, just take a moment to take that in. This nerve is huge. It really travels, and so you can imagine it has a huge impact on all these different organ systems, on our experience of life, on our survival, really, ultimately. And then, Ingrid, if you could come to the next slide, and maybe, zoom out again. So some of you are probably already familiar with polyvagal theory. So if this is all old stuff for you, please excuse me. And then for some of you, maybe this is completely new. But I just wanted to quickly touch on the three principles of the polyvagal theory. So we've got the hierarchy, which is that there are three main nervous system states: the ventral vagal, the sympathetic, and the dorsal vagal. There are blended states, which we'll come to a little bit later. But the principle of hierarchy really says, and we'll come to that in the next slide as well, Deb Dana talks about a ladder, the ladder of the three main states, and that there is a sequence in which those states happen. And I'll speak to that with a different slide in a moment. Then there's neuroception, which is different from perception. So perception is consciously taking in information. Neuroception is really what happens under the radar. It's our nervous system's, you could say, surveillance system that's constantly in the background scanning for safety or for danger, for cues of safety, for cues of danger. And it's scanning inside of our own bodies, it's scanning in the environment, and it's scanning between us, so between me and the other person or other people. So it's always running, always assessing, is it safe, is it dangerous? And it's not that it's either or, there's only cues of safety or cues of danger, but it's assessing what's the quality of those cues of danger. You know, I mean, if I'm looking around now, there are certain things that could be a cue of danger, right? If I have a fire going, fire has to some extent an association with danger, but I can also see it's in a fireplace, so it's okay. And what those cues of safety and danger are is really different for each of us, also based on our history. So if I've been bitten by a dog at some point in my life, then obviously seeing a dog running towards me will be a cue of danger. For me, I've never been bitten by a dog. I love animals. It'll be wonderful. So just to also put that in the mix, that, you know, those cues, there's not like again, not a one size fits all. What's a cue of danger for one person might be a cue of safety for someone else. And it might be contextual, right? In certain contexts, a bird flying by will be a cue of safety. It'll be wonderful. It'll be connection to nature. But if I'm sitting here and a bird flies by my window, and I've had the experience that before that a bird has flown into my window and been dead, then it's obviously got a cue of danger attached to it for me because I've had this bad experience, right? So it can be contextually different. And then the third principle is co-regulation, which we touched on right at the beginning. So our nervous system is wired for connection with others. And when I say others, I don't just mean human others. It also includes non-human beings, like my cat earlier, like the natural world around us, like the trees and the rocks and the mountains. So this is not just our human relationships. And we need co-regulation to learn self-regulation. So a baby's nervous system, when the baby is born, does not have the capacity to self-regulate. And babies learn co-regulation through attunement with their caretakers. And, you know, I don't have children, but we all know, you know, how you talk to babies, the faces you make, the way they respond to that. That is part of the learning how to self-regulate through co-regulation. And if that is absent or if that's inadequate, it has a huge impact on how the nervous system is shaped and how the small or big T trauma manifests later on. The good news is that we can learn co-regulation and self-regulation throughout our lives, and we all have to, in a way, constantly learn it because of all the experiences that we've had in relationships where there may have been rupture, where there may not have been repair, and I guess we could look at this through the types, through the Enneagram types as well, that there's certain experiences that have shaped us in a way that make us want to avoid contact with others, or that make us go into judgment, or that make us go into shame. So this co-regulation is not a one and done, it's an ongoing process of learning as well for all of us. And I really like the statement that comes from Deb Dana, that our autonomic nervous system has both the drive to survive, so to protect us from danger, and it has this longing to connect. This is really the underlying truth of our nervous system.
Thanks, Petra. Can I quickly make an Enneagram connection here?
Please do.
So I'm just thinking about triggers again. So I'm thinking about, say, 7-8 types with a resistance to feeling and vulnerability of a certain kind, being triggered by helplessness, for example. So I know as a 7, I am triggered by other people's helplessness, even a client, if they're helpless. I start cajoling and pushing them. And did that with a client recently and had to do some repair with her. And I know that 8s do that as well. They get impatient with people when they're helpless and vulnerable, and so do threes. So threes don't overtly express it emotionally usually because they're an attachment type and they're kind of better at blending emotional states, but they provide a very quick fix to get out of vulnerability. So if you think in the Enneagram terms, what's going on there? We're being triggered by vulnerability. What does that mean? In many of those three assertive types, 7, 8, 3, there was somebody in the household, it may have been the self, who wasn't allowed to be vulnerable. That vulnerability was experienced as a threat. It could have been a threat in the system, like a helpless mother who wasn't assertive and a bullying father, for example. And the helplessness of the other means I am not going to be protected. If someone else is helpless, it means I'm not going to be protected. So there's a link here to our Enneagram types. The drive to survive and the longing to connect is happening all the time within our type. So those are just a couple of examples. If you think of 1s, 2s, and 6s, and I'm deliberately illustrating using the Hornevian triads, there's often an authority wound, like I'm going to get into trouble and I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be seen as a delinquent. So what you find is that a 6 will often be triggered by an aggressive authority figure, whereas other types aren't. So it's quite helpful for us to notice what triggers us and how, and to kind of be aware of the fact that we're projecting the past onto the present, and then to find the practices that we need to bring ourselves into a different state in the here and now. So every single thing Petra's saying, I just want to make the Enneagram dots a little bit explicit here to, notice what state is happening to us. So let me go to your next slide. Petra, can I move here now?
Yes, fantastic. Yes. So here you've got another beautiful illustration of the vagus nerve there, like an old drawing. And this is the ladder I was talking about when I was talking about hierarchy. So in the polyvagal theory and practice, as Deb Dana teaches us, she thinks of the nervous system as this ladder. And at the top of the ladder, we have the ventral vagal state. So we've got, as I said, safety and connection. This is not that we necessarily feel calm, but it means that we are regulated enough to be present, to feel at ease, to feel resourced and resourcing, to be able to relate to others, to socially engage. So this is at the top of the ladder as she sort of conceives of it. And then below that, when there is a trigger, we go into the sympathetic state of our nervous system. So activation, mobilization, a lot of energy gets activated to fight or flight. And there's a few words here associated with it, the sense of alarm, unease, vigilance, aggression. I think that's meant to be disconnection, where it says is connection. Thank God for autocorrect. So in that state, when we're activated and when there's the mobilization of energy, obviously that energy wants to go somewhere, right? So that's kind of one rung down from the ventral vagal. And then right at the bottom in this model, at the bottom, we'll come to this in a minute, is the dorsal vagal state of the nervous system, which is the state of shutdown or collapse, which in this ladder model seems like it's a place of no energy. It's right at the bottom. It's immobilizing. It looks like numbness or fogginess or despair, depression, but actually the energy that was activated in the sympathetic state is still there. It's just underneath, shut in, locked into the system. So whilst it looks like it's a near death or imminent death state, and it looks like there's no energy in the system, and it feels like that when we're in that state, the survival energy is still there. It's trapped inside. And, we've all seen nature documentaries of a leopard or tiger or lion chasing a gazelle or an antelope or something, and maybe you've seen those ones where just before the leopard, let's go with the leopard, catches the antelope collapses and looks like it's kind of going into a state of death. Take a deep breath, because as we're connecting to this, even as we're bringing up these images, that can be mobilized in our own system if we have experience of that. And then what can happen is, even though this is a state that's there to make the imminent death more pain-free, less painful, it also appears like the animal is dead to the predator. And that can sometimes save the prey animal, because the predator is not interested in an animal that's just lying there, that's not moving anymore. Either they move off because they think they can come back and have it for lunch later, or they're like, oh, well, this is not of interest to me. So what can happen is the predator moves off, and the prey animal, after a while in this state that looks like death, starts to slowly come back out. It starts to orient like we did earlier. It starts to look around and take in that, oh, okay, it's safe now. Then what you see is this shaking response, where it actually actively releases all that survival energy that was stuck under the seeming death state. And then it goes about its day. It doesn't hold on to the experience. It's not traumatized. And this is really where Peter Levine and his somatic experiencing work came from, by observing animals in the wild and the fact that they don't have trauma, because they don't hold on to it. Their nervous system knows how to discharge this survival energy. We also have that in our nervous system. Our nervous system also knows how to deal with it, but we've cut through it and interrupted those cycles with our very, very prominent and dominant mind brain.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, Petra.
Yeah.
Carry
No,
on.
I just wanted to kind of loop it back to that principle of hierarchy. So the hierarchy principle really refers to that we drop down from ventral to sympathetic first, even if it's just for a few seconds. So the activation might not be super visible, but we always go to sympathetic first and then to dorsal. To come out of dorsal, we need that energy of the sympathetic to move back up the ladder. That's really what the hierarchy principle refers to, that we don't jump straight from ventral into dorsal. It might look like it, but there's always a little bit of a charge first. And to come back up from dorsal, we need to move up the ladder slowly by mobilizing some energy. So that's really to illustrate that, that hierarchy principle. There are blended states, and we'll talk about them later. So it's not just those three states are pure states, and each state has a spectrum of experience, of course. So, when we're exercising, when we're hiking, when we're getting things done, we're also bringing in a little bit of the sympathetic nervous system energy. So sympathetic is not all just like fight or flight. And when we're resting, when we're in stillness, when we're meditating, when we're intimate with someone, we also have some of that dorsal energy present, but it's dorsal with some ventral still present. So it's not like each state is just one expression of itself. Sorry, Ingrid, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just freeze. I know we discussed freeze.
We'll come to that on
time.
the next slide, I think.
It doesn't belong in any one of these boxes, is what I'm hearing.
I think I've got it on the next slide. So the freeze is actually that place between sympathetic and dorsal, and we'll speak about it now. So this is an alternative conceptualization or image or illustration of the nervous system. And I like this one because it makes it clearer what I was saying earlier, that dorsal is, even though it's at the bottom of the ladder, it's actually the highest form of activation. We think of it as not very visible, so it doesn't get a lot of attention. We see the fight or flight much more easily. We hear the fight or flight response much more easily when people are triggered, because they might be loud, they might be aggressive, they might be violent. But in a way, the dorsal vagal response is worse, or is more extreme in our nervous system. So it's really at the top of the activation curve in this model. because it is preparing for imminent death, because it means that our nervous system has seen no other way of dealing with the situation, with the threat, with the danger, than to go into dissociation, into collapse, into shutdown.
Mm. Can you please talk about shame? Because I see shame up here, which I didn't notice before, and that's pretty fascinating given that it's such a huge part of the image center.
Yeah, so as you can see in this illustration, it's got a lot of emotions, feelings stuck to the different states. And again, there's no one size fits all. I mean, you might still feel irritation when you're in dorsal, but it will be a very different flavor of irritation than in sympathetic, for example. And shame, I mean, I think if you think of a situation where you were in that dorsal vagal state, that place of shutdown, there's often that secondary, what do they call it in Buddhism, the second arrow. So we might feel depressed or we might feel helpless. That in itself is already a terrible thing to deal with. And then we have the second arrow of shame that comes in because we're judging ourselves for being in that state. And dorsal vagal is the state where we judge ourselves a lot for being helpless, for being depressed, for being numb, for not being able to cope better, right? So yeah, I don't know whether you had any specific question about the shame.
I'm really interested in what you do with a client who's shooting themselves with the second, third, fourth, and fifth arrow.
Often there's quite a strong story attached to it, right? Like them, and that voice that is the shaming voice, the judging voice, the critical voice is usually not our own voice, right? It comes from somewhere, and it might be obvious to the client that that's a parental voice. Maybe that was your father's voice, or it might not be obvious. And then we can just explore, like, what does that voice actually say? And again, I work through the body. So what does shame feel like in the body? What's the posture that this takes you into? And this is where we come to the story of the three states in a moment, because when we're in that state and when we're in the state of shame, what's the story we have about ourselves?
That's lovely. Usually when I work with the inner critic, I do a lot of parts work to visualize and to personify and to get that positive dissociation and to repurpose or come into a different alliance with that part. But I love the idea of saying, okay, when you're in the presence of that part, what is your posture? How do you feel? In like often the part at first is very imposing and big. And then when we have a new relationship with that part, it's scaled to a more human size. The one client I worked with the other day had a very, very punitive inner critic. And this critic was standing looking at him and kind of judging him and thinking you could do better. And through the process that we did of having a conversation with this part, eventually he asked the part, would you feel comfortable rather standing next to me? And it turned out so beautifully. But to add to that process, I really could have done something like say to him, okay, what is the posture when he's standing in front of you with his arms folded like that? What's the nervous system state? And now how do you feel that we've negotiated for him to be an ally? So I'm definitely going to add that to my next part session.
Yeah, and just to say also to include the shame, right? To include and understand the shame as a survival strategy as well. So particularly when attachment trauma or neglect or misattunement happens in those early childhood phases, when we're a child, our survival is physically dependent on the caretakers, right? So we have to choose, do we make them wrong or do we make ourselves wrong? If we make our caretakers wrong for whatever their behavior is, we risk our survival. So instead, we have to make ourselves wrong. A child that has to choose between making the self wrong or making the caretaker wrong chooses making the self wrong.
That's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah, that's a really nice way of reframing or rephrasing what Gabor Mate says is the choice between authenticity and attachment. We choose attachment every time. Your way of saying it is much clearer and easier to understand is who's going to be wrong. I can't afford for my parents to be bad or wrong. That would mean death if they're so fallible or bad. So thanks for that. Would you like me? Are there more slides?
I just wanted to, yes, I wanted to quickly speak to the blended states. If you go back to that one, and we'll maybe do before we come to that last.
This one.
Yes. So you were asking about freeze, and as is,
Yeah.
I think we put it there in the illustration as well. Freeze is kind of at the edge of sympathetic and dorsal, and the difference, because often we use dorsal and freeze synonymously, but freeze is not dorsal. There's different types of immobility. So freeze, if you imagine, is this rabbit in the headlights, right? There's still a lot of muscle tone. There's actually quite a lot of muscle tone because it's that moment of being frozen. Whereas dorsal is really flaccid in the muscles. It's that moment of collapse. So like I think I put it there as well, the mouse in the cat's mouth that's limp because it's really at the last stage before death. The freeze is much more that startle and the immobility that comes from that. And then I also included there the appease and the fawn because people are often interested in that also as kind of blended states. So appeasing as a way to self-snuff. So a little bit like what we just spoke about with the shame of the child having to decide, do I express myself? Am I authentic? Am I prioritizing connection or am I prioritizing survival? And the good example of that, and I think I sent that article to the Enneagram group, is this thing of when a Black person, for example, confronts a police officer. It's a question of, through appeasement, ensuring survival, because we know the likelihood of something else happening is high. So there is a life threat. In that moment, it's a survival strategy to be appeasing. Again, to put the self, the authentic self, with all its emotions, all its other possibilities for reaction to the side, and to step into this appeasement strategy. It's very, very humiliating, as we can imagine, and it's very, very metabolically taxing. So it takes a lot of energy. And differentiated from that fawn is also like we think of it as people pleasing. It's also a blended state. So it's another strategy. I'm gonna take care of your nervous system, i.e., I'm going to be friendly, I'm going to be nice, I'm going to be saying the things you want to hear as a way to avoid you hurting me or as a way to avoid conflict. So there is a little bit of a freeze in that, but at the same time, there's also activation, right? There's also like an alertness that comes with that. I'm hyper aware of what's happening around me. I'm hyper aware of what you, as the person opposite me, needs, so I can respond to that. And in order to do that, I need to leave myself and my connection to myself, my connection to my inner world, my needs, my self-knowing. I need to leave all that behind. I focus completely on the other or on the context to see what's required of me to be strategic about what I say and do. Yeah.
For that,
so let's maybe just yeah.
Yeah, just the Enneagram link again. I mean, we associate type 6, 1, and 2 with fawning as more or less the kind of go-to strategy is how do I please? How do I stay out of trouble? How do I anticipate your needs? But that doesn't mean that other types don't do it in their own way. And that's something to bear in mind. I know many 8s that do quite a lot of appeasement and pleasing, which is interesting. I know as a 7, I do it a lot as well. Is keeping good vibes is a form of fawning and appeasement for me. It's a way of avoiding pain. Is if I can keep you smiling, I'll be okay. And just saying, no, that's fine. Also the 9, false accommodation. yeah, sure, that's fine, when actually it's not fine at all. So just linking it again. Petra?
So maybe you can switch off the presentation for now. I really wanted to also have time for this experiential piece, but before we go there, just want everyone to again take a little moment to return to that connection with the self in whichever way you can in this moment. And it might be through returning to your external resource that you found in your space earlier. It might be again through the breath and seeing if you need to bring in some energy or release some energy and relax a little bit more. It might be to just making yourself those 5% more comfortable, finding a bit of support through the feet on the ground or through the back of the chair. Just notice what works for you. Different things work for different people. Maybe you have your own way of returning to yourself in this present moment as an embodied being, not just a thinking head. Just notice what shifts as you're doing this. How do you know that you're coming back to yourself? And also notice it can be all these little voices that say, oh, this is not so important. I want to get to the rest of the presentation, or I want to get to my dinner, or I want to get off Zoom. And also including those voices that are also part of what it is to be present to ourselves. And then I invite you to take a moment to connect to a sense of what ventral vagal feels like for you, the state of connection, ease, social engagement. You might like to remember a time when you felt that. It can help us to really call that sensation, that felt sense of ventral alive in the present moment, if we remember a moment when we felt that. And when I say to bring it alive, if you're remembering a moment, remember it through all your senses. What did you see? What do you see right now when you're tuning into this memory? What did you hear? What did you touch, or what was the texture, the sensation in your body? What did you smell and taste? And each one of us might be connecting to this differently. Maybe it's more through image, or maybe more through a felt sense in the body, qualities that come alive when we connect to this. Just see, how is it for you to be in ventral? What is the quality of being? And you know this because you have been there. As Deb Dana says, ventral vagal is our home. Notice how connecting to this memory in this moment brings you to the ventral. Yeah. And we're just going to take a little tour through the nervous system so that we're all familiar with this. And we start with the ventral because that's the place where we resource. Because even as we touch into these other states, the survival states, they come alive in our system. And so we want to be careful with that. And we want to titrate it. We want to take small chunks, not going into the most difficult situations in our lives now. just to explore a little bit, what are these states like in our embodied experience? So I'm going to ask you to remember, to tap into, to dip a toe into what sympathetic feels like for you. What is it like when you go into fight or flight? What happens in your body, to your posture, to your experience? What are the thoughts that come up as you contemplate this? Maybe there are images. Maybe there's a connection with particular kinds of activities or situations, which we might call triggers. Really take a moment to get to know what this is like in your system. Knowing that if it starts to feel too intense or too much, you can open your eyes again and orient to your resource. Or you can come back to the memory of that ventral place that you just imagined before. And I'm going to see if we can take another step down the ladder to just, for a moment, dip our toes into the dorsal place. What is that like for you, that dorsal place? How would you describe that? What are the situations, the triggers, the contexts that take you there? And just notice what happens to your body and your breath when you go there. There might be particular impulses in the body for movement or for change of posture. Yeah. Again, when you feel like you have a sense of that, I'm going to ask you to reconnect to the ventral that you started with, so that we always end in ventral, that we find our way back up the ladder. We bring in a little bit of energy, maybe with the breath, by focusing on that energizing inhalation. And that we connect back to that memory, that place, that situation that we started with, the ventral place. Just notice how it is to find your way back there. Yeah. Okay. And then when you feel sufficiently back connected to ventral, and just open your eyes and orient to your space. You might want to take a moment to connect with your resource again. You might also want to reconnect with the sense of us here being together in this virtual space with the faces that you can see. Notice how that is to realize that you're not alone here. You're connected with a bunch of other people, known and unknown. Yeah. And so, to really illustrate this, what Ingrid spoke about earlier, that state changes story, I wanted to do a little demo, and I don't know if there's a volunteer who would like to be led through that little practice, little exercise. It's just really an exploration of those different states with a specific example. If not, then I know Ingrid will volunteer on behalf of all of us. But if there's someone who would like to explore this with me?
Sure.
And yeah, Natasha?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Really appreciate that. So just see again if you can make yourself as comfortable as you can be in this moment, and knowing that we are here together, you and me, and then there's a bunch of other people around us. And just giving your system a moment to adjust to this, that we're here together, doing a little safe exploration. How is it to be here?
I'm grateful that I get to experience this actually. So I sense this mix of excitement and also an occupation with will it be easy or will it be hard to experience, stuff like that. So I'm a lot of different things, and the strongest one is the excitement, really, actually.
And how do you know that you're excited? How does your body let you know that you're excited?
It's right here in my stomach, like this little tingling butterfly kind of movement going on here. And also my breath is a little bit higher. It's not all the way down into the belly. It's like yeah, so it's a lot of activity right here.
Yeah. And how are your feet?
Restless. So my toes are like wiggling and my feet feel hot as well. And some heaviness where I don't even know how it's called. It's where your foot is attached to the leg. There's this this kind of curved shaped space. So it's not ankles, it's like more to the front, and it feels kind of heavy in some way. Kind of, yeah, it feels heavy. There's no explanation for that. It's like there's nothing lying on my feet or anything, and it still feels like there's a weight on them.
And is it pleasant or unpleasant, this weight?
It is rather unpleasant. It's not bad. It is. I almost wanted that you didn't ask, because before I wasn't aware of it. Now I'm aware.
Yeah.
I'm like, it feels like my feet are tired or something, and I need to rest.
Yeah.
And it's a strange sensation because I have never been aware of that before, actually.
And if I asked you, where in your body do you feel the opposite of that? That heaviness, that strange sensation?
That is around the ears. There is like nothing special happening here. They just feel cooler and light and free. So it's really the opposite, actually.
So let's rest our attention there for a moment, on that light and free feeling around the ears. We can name that as a place of resource or a place of support, or a place where we can come back to. What happens next as you keep your attention there?
A thought comes up that it feels nice to have that resource, because I would usually say something like, well, of all the senses, my hearing is maybe the least developed, or something like that. That's not, I would describe myself more as someone who would be occupied with all things visual and stuff like that. And it's almost like all of a sudden I'm realizing that's a story, that's not true, because I have at least one example right now where my ears are a resource. So that's interesting.
Oh, so you haven't even started with anything and you've already discovered something new and useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So the ears can be a resource that we can keep returning to throughout this process whenever it feels like there's something that's too much. That might be a place. And then there might be the place that you identified earlier in your space that you can name if you like, or if you want to just keep it as your own personal little secret, that's also okay.
So I have two dogs here right by my side, and the resource I chose earlier was one of the dogs, actually, because I can put my hand, his body is resting, is really like all relaxed. So just looking at him, it's like, so that's nice.
So see,
And now
as you're
he's
describing that.
He's lifting his head because he's like almost sensing, are you talking about me or something? So there's something changing here.
Yeah, beautiful. And I saw that relaxation that came into your body, and the way your face changed as you were talking about your dog and about that touching the dog and the instant resource that is. Beautiful. So are you willing to explore a little bit? I'm going to explore a little bit the story of the three states. So, and at any point, please interrupt me if you need a moment.
Okay.
This is at the pace of your nervous system. So I'm just going to ask you to think back in the last week or two and to think of a moment where you would say you were triggered, and to pick something that's like on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a trigger of 2 or 3. So really something small, like a small irritation, frustration or something.
Yeah, easy. There it is.
Yeah, you've got something. Okay. And do you want to name that for us?
Sure.
Is it okay to share?
It was today, where I did actually a couple of social media posts, and I was annoyed by the fact that I did one yesterday, which had like no traction. And today I was like, oh, let me make a better one. And it was exactly the same, actually. So that was really like, And when I was reading the triggers earlier, I was like, all right. And so yeah, that would be a good example of not something like really heavy and still annoying enough to keep me busy and yeah.
Yeah. So what state do you think that put you in your nervous system, this trigger?
What do you mean with state?
So, we've got ventral and we've got sympathetic and we've got dorsal. Where did you go when this trigger happened?
Dorsal. And the reason I'm saying that is because I could almost like I could sense this withdrawing movement of almost like it was embodied by my computer, but it was like it's the whole, almost like the whole world, like in there, and feeling like how I want to withdraw from that and never be involved with it again. And also a feeling of I'm ignored, and I'm maybe shame, definitely shame, um, and also feeling very depleted, like there's no energy whatsoever, which is not true, because right after I did this fantastic session with a client, and I was like back here in my body, everything was wonderful. Um, but the sensation in the moment was very strong, actually. I really could almost like feel drained and heavy, and wanted to sleep really, and
Mm-hmm.
and yeah.
Yeah, and you touched on it a little bit already. So you said something about it was like the whole world was there in the computer and you wanted to, remove yourself from it, withdraw from it. If I asked you just in a sentence to say, what was your perception of the world or other people at that moment? They are, or the world is.
Everybody is against me and ignoring me,
Yeah,
as if
yeah,
they have nothing else to do.
yeah. And your perception of yourself, so if the whole world is ignoring you and you want to withdraw, what was your sense of yourself in that moment?
I'm I'm alone. Um, I don't. There's something wrong with me. I don't have the capabilities I need to do this. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Huh.
so very, very alone against everyone else, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Wow. Yeah, so that's definitely quite a dorsal story there. So let's just take a breath. And if you're willing to shift into the sympathetic state, so by bringing in some of maybe an idea or a sense of that, how that sympathetic state feels in you, like that fight or flight. And as if you're putting on a pair of glasses now, you're going to look at the same situation through the lens of the sympathetic state. So that same trigger, how would the situation have felt if you'd been in a sympathetic state?
Hmm. Interesting. So that feels like wanting to jump right in and create something new.
Mhm.
Um, a, a can-do attitude, like solution oriented,
Mhm.
and also curious of what could be the thing that would make them look.
Mhm.
So like this exploring and yeah, curiosity really.
Mhm. And in that place, from that, place of fight or flight or this place in sympathetic, what does the world look like in that place? The other people or the world as in the audience or
As a as an it feels like competition or something to address, or fight would be maybe too strong, but still like um it feels like confront or be very active, show how strong I am.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah.
and I feel also very awake, because I need to know what's happening and what is needed actually in this situation.
Hmm. So there's an alertness that I hear you
Absolutely.
describing. Hmm. And
Mhm.
so we just talked about what does the world or other people look like from that place. What is your sense of yourself when you're looking through that sympathetic lens at the situation. How do you see yourself now?
I feel powerful. I feel I need to be as well. So it's more like a vigilant power, more like if, it doesn't feel pleasant really. But that's not, that's not the point actually. It doesn't need to be pleasant. It needs to be enough to deal with the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to invite you to, for a moment, connect with your dog there by your side, with your ventral anchor that's there, to bring some of that ventral energy online again. And I can see it in your face. It's got an instant impact.
Because he's
Yeah.
staring at me like, finally.
Yeah, finally.
Yeah.
And so now let's put on another pair of glasses and look at the same situation through the lens of this ventral state. You might like to imagine there's a different color glass lens. How would you describe the situation from that place?
Interesting. So it feels warm. It feels inviting. There is space and a lot of time. There is no rushing. It just feels like I can take my time to connect and to search for how I would do that, what would be a way to be myself inviting to people, to have this almost like search for a link, an entrance point, a way to. Oh, that's interesting. So I'm engaged in seeing someone else now instead of wanting to be seen. So I'm more occupied with that. What can I see there? Um, what would be a way to like in a very friendly and inviting way, um, a way
Connect.
to create a little line between us.
So when you describe it like that, sounds there's also like a different story about the world or the other people, and a different story about who you are, right?
Absolutely. This is very different. And I just had this this little shift in my eyes. There's something I was not aware of before. So if I would right now make a post, create something, the imagery would be different, the wording would be different, the whole point would be different. So that's that's a wonderful experiment actually. Like what is different? So the space, what I'm learning here is a space I'm coming from. When I start writing a post already, I feel like how I'm. So when you were walking me through, I was recognizing some of these elements, and none of it is. I have never had an experience where I would bring this as. It feels like up front here, like it's very different. I know for sure that I have never created something from that space. How amazing is that?
Yeah.
So that's like, wow, what an aha here. What would happen if I would bring that energy? Because it would be felt in what I make,
Yeah.
what I
That's
create. Because the point is different. There is all the things I've been saying before, like it feels actually like very almost like, I would not say hostile, but still it's like there's this rigidity or this like, I don't even know how to, it's hard and cold or something. And
yeah.
I'm wondering why nobody's engaging with my post, like duh. So
Yeah.
it's wonderful actually. And so that would be a wonderful experiment to really be in that, from that state really, create and engage and connect and see what happens. So that's a cool experiment for this week and the coming weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for being willing to explore that. So, such a beautiful illustration of how state changes story, right? And I would encourage all of you to think of a small trigger in your own time and take it through the lens of these three states and see how different it looks. The situation is the same. The situation we can't control, but when we are in that space of being resourced, grounded, centered, connected to the ventral energy in ourselves, the whole situation looks different. There's a sense of possibility that you heard. There's a sense of the relational dimension that Natasha described so beautifully. Whereas when we're in sympathetic or in dorsal, the world looks hostile, or the world looks like they're against us, or they are competitors. We ourselves might look to ourselves small, or not there's a sense of not, I can't be, or I can't do, or so this is a really powerful illustration of how much our nervous system state influences how we experience ourselves, how we experience other people, and how we experience the world around us. That's why this work is so powerful, because it changes everything. It doesn't change the situation, it changes how we approach it and what we feel capable of in that moment. Yeah, thank you, Natasha,
Thank you so much. I
sharing
feel
that.
like even more grateful than I could have imagined. So thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately we're kind of out of time, but if I had done this with more time, we could have explored so much more in each of those states. I just want to add that in, the whole body sensations that we have in those states, the feelings that come up, the associations, the imagery, all that's all part of that, what happens in each of those states. So I encourage you to spend some time journaling around that for yourself, around a small trigger and how you might see that differently. And I don't know, Ingrid, if you could just for a moment bring up that last slide for me so I can just complete with that. Ingrid and I are terrible. We always run out of time because we have so much passion for what we want to share. So just wanted to briefly touch on this image there, and I used it with Natasha as well. This state changes story. It's like putting on a different pair of glasses. The lenses are different through which we look at the world. And that beautiful Porges quote there, the physiological state changes are accompanied by changes in perception, behavior, and thought processes. As our physiological state shifts, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves and the world also shifts. We saw that so beautifully with Natasha. And that's why polyvagal theory really is such a theory of hope and possibility. I'm not going to touch on the rest on that slide now. You can read that in your own time, but that just speaks to the opposite side of that. How the types that Ingrid spoke about and the type triggers is really the opposite of that, where a state that we've rehearsed again and again and again becomes a trait, and it looks like on an individual level like personality or like our Enneagram type expression, and on a family level, on a cultural level, that also has repercussions. So I know that Ingrid has to sign off very soon. So I'm just gonna leave it there, but you're very welcome to contact me with questions, and Ingrid's going to share the recording and share the slides, I think. Yeah, I would have loved to have had more time to discuss.
Yes, I'm sorry that we're out of time. I do have to go. I've got a client in Canada who booked an adjacent debrief, so I've let her know that I'm running a little bit late, but I do need to go. I just want to thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, Natasha, for being part of a demo. Thank you so much, Petra. This work is just wonderful and links so beautifully to the Enneagram, because we can see that when we in a different state, our type is activated, and it's just so obvious once we see it, but once we experience it, especially. And for me, the real treasure is when we activate it in a situation to do nothing until we are in a state where we can choose and where we feel differently and where the story is different. So being able to say, I can't engage with it now, my nervous system is activated, let me go away and I'll come back to you when I'm feeling a bit better. Just buying oneself time is priceless. So that for me has been one of the big takeaways that's really helped in my relationships. So yeah, just unfortunately have to close out there. But thank you so much for being here. And it would be great if you could just in closing maybe put a word, a phrase, or a sentence in the chat. And look forward to seeing you again. Hopefully you can make it on Saturday. Saturday's Community of Practice, 4 p.m. South African time, is about psyche delos, which means the revelation of the psyche to itself. So it's not just about psychedelics and substances, it's about how is the psyche revealed to itself, and is the Enneagram a psychedelic, a substitute for psilocybin? I think it is. For those of us that are scared to mess with our brain chemistry. So yeah, hopefully see you there. Any closing words, Petra?
Yeah, there's so much more to say, right? Like, there were so many little things that you said earlier that I wanted to come back to, but just maybe in closing, I just wanted to say something that I didn't really touch on very much earlier, that this is not about always being in ventral. This is not about always being calm. This is about having, I'm going to use my little tool here, flexibility in the nervous system. So if this is sympathetic and this is dorsal, what we want is a nervous system that's got the flexibility to adapt according to the situation, to respond appropriately. So we're not avoiding dorsal and sympathetic. I mean, after all, they're what has helped us get here. Without them, we wouldn't be alive right now. So we do want access to all of those states, and we want to know how we come back. So we don't want to get stuck there. We want to have a nervous system that knows how to come back to equilibrium, to ventral. When we've been triggered, come back. When we've collapsed, at some point we come out again. So we want this beautiful rhythm of the nervous system, expansion and contraction, rather than, when we talk about regulation, people often assume that regulated means we're calm and peaceful and everything's wonderful. Regulation just means that I'm responding appropriate to the situation. If there's a threat, of course I need to go into sympathetic. If I'm super tired and exhausted, of course I will go into dorsal. We're just responding to what's there rather than responding to what was there at some point or wasn't there at some point in the wiring in our nervous system. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to add so that that's clear, because there's a lot of like, reset your nervous system, be forever in a regulated nervous system kind of things out there. And that is really not what this work is about, Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, and sorry we overran and ran out of time, but we will surely do more.
Definitely. And yeah, hopefully see you on Saturday or in some of our other learning spaces. If you're not on my mailing list, just email me so that you can stay up to date. I announce these things. I'm not great at sending newsletters, so I promise you won't be spammed. I get around to it every 2 months or so, but you will at least get some notifications. And my YouTube channel is where I upload these recordings. So if you subscribe to that thing, you'll get a notification when a new video is loaded. So great. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was lovely to see you. It was lovely to connect, Natasha. Thanks again. And Petra, as always, thank you
for the
your
invitation.
wonderful work. Cheers, everybody. Go well. Have a lovely evening. And see you soon. Ciao, ciao.
And apologies to your client, Ingrid. We're all going to slip out now because presumably she's coming into this room, right?
Yes.